A heavy-set rancher discovered a young woman bound to a boulder in the middle of open rangeland, and the first words out of her mouth weren't a cry for help. They were a warning. Not here. Please, not here. Caleb Dunn stood motionless beneath the brutal Montana summer sun just outside Miles City. His broad shadow barely stirred in the parched grass. He'd spent the better part of an hour following a stray heifer's tracks across the hillside when something else caught his attention first. A shattered wagon wheel, half swallowed by dust, one spoke broken clean off. No horses. No driver anywhere in sight. That alone told him something was wrong. He slowed his steps after that, moving carefully despite his size, boots barely whispering through the dry earth. The wind brought nothing with it. No voices, no movement, just the relentless shimmer of heat rising off the flatland. Then he saw her. Not where you'd expect a person to be. Not like anything he'd seen before. She was positioned behind a wide, flat boulder, wrists pulled tight, ankles lashed together, the rope work done with a precision that stopped Caleb cold. This wasn't the desperate knotwork of some road thief. This was methodical, practiced, the kind a man learned from repetition, not panic. She looked young. 20, maybe 22. Her dress was torn along the bottom, coated in trail dust. A thin streak of dried blood traced her forearm, but her eyes were sharp. Sharper than they had any right to be given her circumstances. Caleb moved closer, his hand already finding the handle of his belt knife. "I'm cutting you loose," he said, quiet and even. Her head came up fast. "Not here. Please, not here." The words hit him differently than any scream would have. They weren't about him. They were about something else entirely. He stopped. A breeze moved through the grass. Something on the ridge above them caught the sunlight for just a fraction of a second. Metal. Maybe glass. He didn't turn to look. "Not yet. They're watching," she whispered. "If you free me here, they'll know exactly when it happened." Caleb looked at the rope, then at the slope above, then back at her face. He had seen men used as bait before. He'd also seen men left to die while others stood around debating. His knife stayed in his grip. And then, with a slow and deliberate movement, he knelt down anyway. Because whatever was watching from up on that ridge had already seen him arrive. The decision had already been made the moment he stopped walking. The blade found the rope. A dry, tight snap, and for a long second the girl didn't move. She sat there with her wrists still pressed together, as if her body hadn't yet accepted that the rope was gone. Then the wind shifted. Caleb rose slowly and placed himself between her and the open hillside. No need to look back toward the ridge. "Whatever was up there already knew. Can you stand?" he asked. She nodded. When she tried, her legs gave out halfway up. Caleb caught her before she went down. She was lighter than he expected and tightly wound. Like an animal that hadn't yet decided whether a helping hand was something to accept or run from. "Easy now," he said. Her fingers curled briefly into his shirt, then let go just as fast. They left the boulder behind without another word. Caleb moved at an angle across the land, not straight down the slope, not straight up toward the ridge, but cutting sideways through the grass the way a man travels when he doesn't want his path to be obvious. Behind them, the broken wagon sat silent. After a few minutes, she spoke. "They'll come looking." "I know," Caleb said. She hesitated. Then her hand dropped toward the torn hem of her dress. He thought she was checking a wound at first. Instead, something small slipped from the fabric and fell into the grass between them, a thin roll of oilskin paper. She froze. He'd already seen it. Neither one moved for a moment. The grass whispered around them like nothing in the world was broken. "That's what they're after," Caleb said. She said nothing. Her jaw tightened, and something new came into her eyes. Not fear. Closer to fury. "They'll kill to get it back," she said, her voice barely above a breath. Caleb believed her without hesitation. He'd seen men kill for far less. He picked up the roll, turned it once in his hand, and handed it back without unfolding it. "Then we don't go into town," he said. That made her look up at him. Most men would have headed straight for Miles City, handed her over to someone with a title and a desk, and let it become somebody else's problem. That was the safe road. The sensible road. Caleb wasn't looking for either. He glanced once toward the ridge. "The rope they used on you," he said. "That's not drifter work. I've seen that style of knot before. It's the kind men learn when they spend time around jailhouses." She understood immediately. "Lawmen," she said. He didn't confirm it with words. He just started walking again. They moved faster now, angling toward the low ground where a thin ribbon of green marked the Tongue River cutting through the valley below. The heat pressed down like a hand on the back of the neck, but Caleb kept a consistent pace, no wasted motion. After a stretch of silence, she spoke again. "My name's Clara." He gave a short nod. "Caleb." That was enough for now. Out here, names mattered less than timing. And right now, something else demanded his full attention. Somewhere behind them, beyond the ridge they could no longer see, a rider had just started moving, and he wasn't riding alone. They didn't slow down. The river came into view just before the sun began its long drop toward the horizon, the heat still heavy but the light going golden across the grass. Caleb cut along the bank, then turned onto a path most travelers would have walked right past without noticing. The old ranch sat low and quiet behind a row of scrub brush and half-collapsed fencing. Not much to look at, but it was standing. A young man named Eli was the first to see them. He came out from the shade alongside the barn, squinting, wiping his palms on the front of his shirt. "Wasn't expecting anyone," he said. Caleb didn't break stride. "Get some water. And keep your voice low." Eli moved without argument. He brought water, then brought more, watching Clara without making a show of it. She drank like someone who had learned early on never to waste what was offered. Inside the barn, the air was cooler. Not by much, but enough to think clearly. Clara settled onto an overturned feed crate, hands folded in her lap, still holding that small roll of paper like it was the last anchor she had left in the world. Eli leaned toward Caleb, voice low. "How bad?" Caleb glanced toward the open land beyond the fence line. "The kind of trouble that carries a badge," he said. "That landed hard." Eli's expression shifted. He didn't need anything more than that. For a while, the only sounds were flies, settling wood, and the distant movement of the river. Caleb sat down across from Clara. "Tell me," he said simply. She looked at him the way a person looks at a door they're not sure they should open. Then she did. "My father refused to sign the water rights over," she said. "He told them the land needed that water more than any man with deep pockets." She paused. "So they made sure he couldn't say it again." The words sat in the air between them, heavy and still. Eli looked away. Clara pressed her fingers against the roll of paper. "He knew they'd come for him. He knew they'd search me if they found me. So he hid it somewhere they wouldn't think to look." Her voice steadied. "That paper is the only thing standing between them and owning everything his family ever built." Caleb didn't ask what was written on it. He already understood enough. Then a sound carried across the open land. Hooves, still distant, but coming with purpose. He stood. Eli followed his eyes toward the darkening horizon. "How many do you think?" Eli asked. Caleb listened for another moment. "More than one," he said. And this time, they were riding straight for the ranch. The hoofbeats came with the patience of men who already knew the ending. No hurry, no hesitation. Just forward motion. Caleb stepped out from the barn into the cooling dusk. Dust rose low along the horizon line, thin at first, then building. 3 riders, moving in formation, unhurried and deliberate. One of them he recognized. Eli appeared beside him, doing his best to look steadier than he felt. "You know them?" "Middle one," Caleb said. Behind them in the doorway, Clara stood motionless, paper still in her hands. "You don't owe me this," she said quietly. "No," Caleb agreed. "I don't," the riders drew closer. Shapes sharpened into details. Hats pulled low, relaxed shoulders. Men who had done this particular errand many times before and expected it to go the same way it always did. The man in front rode a half-length ahead of the others. Deputy Ward Calloway. Everything about him looked orderly. Shirt pressed, gun holstered properly, the kind of face that read as trustworthy at first glance, if you didn't know what you were looking at. They stopped just outside the broken fence line. Ward's expression carried the shape of a smile. "Evening, Caleb." Caleb stood with his hands loose at his sides. Ward, no warmth, no hostility, just the name. Ward's eyes traveled past him to Clara. "There she is," he said almost softly. "We've been out half the day looking for you." Clara didn't move. She's on my property, Caleb said. Ward exhaled like a man whose afternoon had been made unnecessarily long. Now, Caleb, you understand how this works. Young woman gets herself into a difficult situation, we bring her back safe. Keep the peace. That's all this is. Caleb took one slow step forward. She's not in a difficult situation, he said. She's in danger. One of the men behind Ward gave a quiet, humorless laugh. Ward didn't. The easy expression on his face faded slightly around the edges. You've always had a way of turning straightforward things into something complicated. This isn't complicated, Caleb said, because it wasn't. A line was either crossed or it wasn't. A man either stood in front of it or moved out of the way. Ward's voice dropped a register. She's carrying something that belongs to other people. It belongs to the land, Clara said from the doorway. Ward looked at her then, and for the first time, the patience was entirely gone from his eyes. Move aside. Caleb. Caleb had heard those exact words before. Different faces, different stretches of country, but always the same tone underneath them. Step aside. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Look the other way and let it happen. There had been a time in his life when he had stepped aside. Not from cowardice, but from the particular exhaustion that comes from carrying too much for too long. It had always been easier to walk away. Easier to live with the silence than with whatever came after. His eyes moved across the dry grass, the river line in the distance, the wide open sky overhead. None of it cared what a man decided in a moment like this, but the man still had to carry whatever he decided. He exhaled slowly. No, he said. Not loud, not with anger. Just certain. The quiet that followed had weight to it. Eli stopped breathing. Clara went still. Caleb didn't move from where he stood. I'm not moving. That was the line. It had been there from the beginning, waiting quietly. Now it was out in the open. Ward gave a small, measured nod. Then he swung down from his horse and walked forward, unhurried, his hand drifting toward his hip in that particular way of a man who has already made his decision. And Caleb understood, in that moment, that this was the thing he had been sidestepping for years. The moment where choosing not to act would cost someone else everything, so the question was no longer if he would draw. It was whether he could still do it and remain who he had worked so hard to become. Nobody moved. Ward's hand dropped first. Not fast, not reckless. Just enough. Caleb read it the way a rancher reads the sky before a storm. His own hand came up without rushing, carrying the steadiness of something that had never quite been forgotten. One shot. Ward's gun hit the dirt. He stumbled back, hand clenched, eyes wide with something between pain and recognition. The other two riders had gone completely still. You should have stayed out of it, Ward said through his teeth. Caleb lowered the gun. I tried to, he said, and that was the honest truth. By the following morning, word had made its way to the right people in Miles City. Not every man wearing a badge had forgotten what the badge was supposed to stand for. Some of them still remembered. Things didn't change overnight. They never do. But weeks passed, and the land held its ground. The water kept running where it always had. The paper Clara had carried across open rangeland in the hem of a torn dress did what her father had intended it to do. Sometimes that's what justice actually looks like. Not a courtroom, not a headline, just a river still flowing where it belongs. Clara stayed on at the ranch, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she chose to. She learned the pace of the place, the quiet mornings, the work that didn't ask for an audience. No pretending required Caleb. Stopped pretending he was someone who could walk away from everything that mattered and call that a life well lived. He had come to understand something that doesn't require much explanation once you've lived. Restraint isn't weakness. Patience isn't surrender. And when the moment finally arrives that asks something real of you, doing what's right has nothing to do with anger. It has everything to do with knowing who you are and refusing to be anything less. Here's what I believe, for whatever it's worth. A man rarely gets to choose when his moment arrives, but he always gets to choose what he does when it does. So ask yourself honestly, if that moment came for you today, would you stand your ground, or would you find a reason to step aside? If this story stayed with you, take a moment to like and subscribe, because in the end, none of us are asked to be perfect. We're just asked to show up when it counts.